it gets to the point where the characters develop themselves in a certain way in my head that they begin to tell me their story. I'm not struggling to create a story. I'm basically watching and being told a story. And then it's a matter of sitting down and writing it out. If the character is struggling, as a writer, I'm doing something wrong or I'm stuck. If you can't feel the naturalness of a character and the naturalness in how they are dialoguing in your head, feeling inside themselves, you're not being successful in writing the story.
This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Going on set now. On set.
Welcome to episode 36. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast, or if you had your own success in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, please write me. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Thanks for leaving me a short message about the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Once again, the email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Dee Rapposelli, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast. It's great having you with me today.
Thank you.
Tell me about writing as a sorceress and when it all began.
I had been interested in spirituality for quite a long time, since I was a child. In fact, I was interested in Eastern spirituality for very many years. And then I got a little tired of it at a certain point after, say, 25 years of this. Well, let's do something else. So I started to reflect on a great-grandmother of mine. She was said to be a stregona. Stregona means witch or sorceress in Italian. I started to look into folk magic, and from there kind of went down the rabbit hole into different avenues of Western occultism. And so I like to, in a sense, I like to identify as a sorceress.
Dee, you really found something when you went down that rabbit hole.
My writing is a way of entertaining myself. It's a way of feeding back to myself the things that I know. I think it's just about having fun with ideas. I got to a point in my spirituality, and that is another reason why I like a form of magic called Chaos Magick, because I realized, in a sense, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Have fun entertaining yourself in a healthy way, but have fun entertaining yourself. Don't take things too seriously. Find a creative center.
Can you explain about the idea of adopting a magical name to write by?
In spiritual groups and in magical groups, people often either are given a magical name or a different name, a spiritual name. It's as if when people are baptized or they go through some sort of religious initiation, they often take on a name. So this also happens in other kinds of groups. I've chosen the name Soror ZSD23. Sora means sister, as if I were a nun or something. Zoe, Sophia, Dione stands for ZSD. That's the name of 3 Greek goddesses: life, wisdom, and goddess, divinity. And 23 is a number that is sacred to chaos magicians. That means joy and life.
Are there many of you?
Yeah, I think there are many of us. Of me, yeah. There's a whole demimonde of people interested in either folk magic or Western occultism as a spiritual orientation.
Do they also look at it as a fun endeavor and not take it too seriously?
You find all kinds. I think people are looking for an alternative spiritual center, fall into these kind of fringe things.
A day job and a sorceress writer by night?
For my day job, I'm the editor of a major journal on gastroenterology and hepatology.
Wow.
So I have a lot of background in medical science. When I was writing La Maga, actually, when I was writing all 3 of the books, I was the editor of a journal on neurology. So sometimes my background in medicine, especially my background in neurology, which is one of my favorite science topics, find their way into my stories. In the first book, La Maga, and this idea carries through all 3 books, there is a running theme that certain people have a certain magical power, and that power is called the Chaos Magick charm. It's the power to absorb the life force out of beings. It's kind of like a vampiric power. I got this term because when I was working on the neurology publication, I came across the term Chaos Magick. Chaos Magick is the name of a cone snail that lives in the South Pacific. It, and there are other creatures in nature that do the same thing. They contain neurotoxin. They sting their prey with neurotoxin. Chaos Magick means magician's cone. Thought that term was adorable and interjected it into the story. So that's a running theme throughout the 3 stories. In the first story, one of the characters, the way she ended up getting from the outer plane into the inner plane, meaning our ordinary world into the magical world I write about, is that she had epilepsy. I talk about that. They have certain kinds of strange experiences while they're having seizures sometimes. So I play with that and interject that into the stories.
The magical world you write about, is it difficult to bring it from your mind onto paper?
Not at all. When I begin to write, I often see the whole story all together. I see the beginning, I see the middle, I often see the end. It happens in a flash. As the characters develop in my mind, it's more like a visitation. I don't struggle to create them most times. It's as if I'm watching a movie. If I'm having trouble really defining a character, I might think about a character in a movie that I like and model a character after that. I will have a sense of how that character speaks, their mannerisms, their inner feelings. It gets to the point where the characters develop themselves in a certain way in my head that they begin to tell me their story. They tell me who they are. I'm not struggling to create a story. I'm basically watching and being told a story. And then it's a matter of sitting down and writing it out. I feel a flow. I start seeing a movie in my head. If the character is struggling, as a writer, I'm doing something wrong or I'm stuck. I do know other writers, and I know people who work in theater and do screenplays who tell me that their process, how they feel when they're creating, what they're seeing as they're writing, is very similar to what I'm describing. If you can't feel the naturalness of a character and the naturalness in how they are dialoguing in your head, feeling inside themselves, you're not being successful in writing the story then. You're not being successful with that character. You have to find another approach.
Is there an overriding message to your story?
Redemption. About finding yourself, finding the resources in other people to bring you to who you really are. In my stories, a lot of characters are anti-heroes. I don't really have villains so much. I have anti-heroes where characters aren't black and white. They're dark and light. Sometimes the dark is a little bit stronger and sometimes the light is a little stronger, but they're complex. They're all trying to find a sense of transcendence and a sense of redemption. I like those themes because I think that's what we all are aspiring to.
Given the subject matter, who exactly is your audience as it relates to fantasy and fiction? You say your writing is for adults. Does that mean your content is inappropriate for children?
When I began writing the series, my idea was to direct the project to adults who are interested in children's fantasy fiction. But I wanted it to be for adults and have content in it that was relevant to adults, which is different, say, from, Harry Potter has content in it that adults really enjoy, but it's not directed toward adults. So I have a lot of political metaphor in my story. I have sexuality. I have alternative forms of sexuality in my stories. In the third book, I address concepts related to anarchy. So in a sense, it's probably not appropriate for a 14-year-old. But then again, when I was 14, I was reading The Exorcist and, the biography of Lenny Bruce, things I probably shouldn't have been reading, but I was able to read them. I would say if a person was a high-level reader, they might enjoy the books. The other thing is that a person needs to have a a higher reading level overall to read my books because they're not escapist fantasy fiction. They're thoughtful. You have to think and you have to have a little bit of reference point, or you might appreciate them more if you have a reference point in spirituality or in mysticism or magic.
You describe your third book, The Savior at the End of Time, which has just become available on the Kindle, as Chaos Magick meets Jesus Christ Superstar. How did you come up with that combination?
Jesus Christ Superstar is one of my favorite theater pieces. I was on a roll watching theater productions and movies of Jesus Christ Superstar shortly before I began writing the third book. I got the idea that I would write my own version of the gospel. Jesus Christ meets Chaos Magick. Chaos Magick is a form of magic that I kind of settled into. It is a system that questions paradigms, that questions belief structures, and plays with magic in a psychodynamic way. I just thought it would be an interesting mix. My idea was, in a sense, to create a story that was similar to, or along the lines of The Who's Tommy, or Jerzy Kaczynski's book Being There, where you have this person who is completely off, a strange character, but yet he's set up to be a savior or a person that now everyone, instead of shunning, is thinking is this wise man. And so that is the main character in that third book, Savior at the End of Time. His name is Aurelio Zosimo. So that's this odd character that people are rallying around and are manipulating to be the leader of an apocalyptic movement.
How long do you spend writing a book?
I spend probably about 9 months writing the first draft. I think I did that with all the 3 books.
How do you come up with plot progression and character development?
Often a story will just occur to me, something will inspire me, and then the story just will spontaneously form in my mind, usually completely. The characters will emerge. Often they kind of take on a life of their own.
Why did you decide to go the self-publishing route?
I became a little frustrated with getting rejected. I became frustrated with the catch-22 of you need an agent to get published, but you can't get an agent unless you're published. Because self-publishing became more acceptable, people who self-publish need to be very aggressive in social networking. It helps if they have a huge list of contacts that will support them. Most especially need a lot of time to self-promote.
Recording a podcast on Eat, Sleep, Write doesn't hurt either.
Podcasting is a great thing, yeah.
Any plans to publish non-fiction on magical or mystical things?
I will shortly publish a non-fiction book on my experiences working with a 16th century magical book called The Arbital. The Arbital is a medieval magical book, and like others, it's very Christian in message. It talks about how to be in grace with the rhythms of the universe, and meshes Christian with pre-Christian ideas. So I worked on the Arbital alone and with 3 other people. So that should be coming along in another month or 2.
Tell me more about the book.
The Savior at the End of Time is a story about a character who is made into a hapless savior, poster boy for a utopian movement. It culminates in an apocalyptic ending, the end of the world.
How about an excerpt?
I would love to read you an excerpt. You see, Zosimo's strangeness, distraction, and docility made him a breeze of target for sorcerer bullies. It eventually came to be observed, though, that within 42 days of an assault, all hell would break loose on the tyrants in ways that usually involved a run-in with the law. Whatever notorious trespass or act of foul play was hidden in a proverbial closet would be made plain as day, and the nasty aggressors would get theirs. Thus, it eventually became clear that Zossi was no ineffectual idiot pushover after all. He was subtle, if not passive-aggressive, and not worth trifling with. Those closest to him knew when he was taking revenge. He would adopt a toxic glamour marked by certain infernal affectations. These affectations included chain-smoking stale cigarettes, drinking lots of liquor and Turkish coffee, and living on a diet of meat and onions. His breath would reek, his complexion would turn grayish, and his physique would wither to wiry gauntness. He would forego hygiene and wear imported leather for which the pheromonal stink had not been lifted out. and he would aimlessly ride his vintage Norton Commando motorcycle with abandon, making sure that it emitted a profuse, farty exhaust, and that the motor revved very loudly. In effect, Zosima would raise hell. If cavorting with wild or for hire women were involved in this constellation of affectations, it was a sure bet that Zossie's target would have been better off committing suicide than wait for the shit to hit the